So as I promised last week, for the rest of the training, we're going to talk about how to co-create, as Ken Wilber said, a relationship in this modern, postmodern times that will actually last. And I want to give you a little context how I came to this insights around purpose when I finished my first book, Integral Relationships, in 2010. There was this spiritual teacher named Andrew Cohen, who at the time had a magazine called Enlighten Next, or What is Enlightenment. He gave a talk in Sausalito, and I just wanted to go out again and meet some people. I thought, what else could he say that Eckhart Tolle says about spirituality, or what I learned in my Buddhist Sangha and practice, right? Be present in the moment and surrender to what is, and don't have any desire, attachment, or hatred, as the Buddhists say, and Ken Wilber says, strengthen your witnessing consciousness. We know all these spiritual things, so what else could he say, right? But I went anyway, and at this meeting, my perspective on spirituality and life started to be completely changed. It was one of the 4 transformational events in my life, or encounters that I had. The first one was Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which led me to Gandhi and Abraham Maslow and Viktor Frankl and other sources of him. And the second was Eckhart Tolle. The third was Ken Wilber. And the fourth was this afternoon with Andrew Cohen. And what he described there was what he calls evolutionary enlightenment or spirituality. And he said, sure, there is enlightenment where we transcend our ego, right, and are no longer attached or have desires, etc., what I just mentioned. But he said that's just like zero. He called it to go from -1 to 0. And what he pioneered with his students in his Sangha, which is now defunct, as you may know, was that we are actually not just these passive observers of what is arising, but that there is something that they call the evolutionary impulse, or eros, that is manifesting through us. And so we're not separate or a passive or witnessing consciousness of everything that arises, but in a non-dual way, right? We are a part of that, and we can align ourselves with this evolutionary impulse to authentically manifest in the world. That's like a short way maybe of saying that. And what that did for me was that I was inhibited or not really clear how to offer, sell my book and sell my ideas. I always felt like, well, if everything is perfect as it is, and I shouldn't, feel that something should be different because that's not spiritual, right? That somehow held me back. And I had never before to sell my own ideas or market myself. It's kind of was a really weird thing. But that gave me the courage, or I realized I really feel passionate about this work, as you can know. And it's not coming from ego if I offer that to the world, but it's coming from this, what they called evolutionary impulse that's manifesting through me. So I don't know how that resonates with me, but with you. But for me, that was a huge insight that really transformed my whole life. And so a few months later, I went to an integral event called the Integral Spiritual Experience. There were about 500 people in Asilomar, and I went to a talk there by a guy named Brian Wetton, who has a company called Selling by Giving, and he talked about a phenomenon there that many helping professionals seem to experience, and I experienced it too, that specifically if you do it by yourself, you have 2 tasks that you have to perform. One is that you deliver, right, your teaching or your service or whatever you do as a coach, a therapist, a teacher, right? And on the other side, you have to market yourself. And of course, most people don't like the marketing part. Some people do. Even those who do, they often fall so like in a trap that when they work on the marketing, they feel like, oh, I should like hone my skills or talk to my clients or deliver the service. And when they talk to the clients, they go like, oh, I should work on my website or my social media or on my marketing, right? And so it's kind of like a little bit of feminine, masculine, and a lot of people fall in the middle. They don't do either, right? They go to the fridge or they go for a walk or they look around on the internet aimlessly or, right? And I went like, yeah, that's often I have that too. On one side, I think I should make money and market myself. And on the other side, I really want to learn more or deliver my what I feel passionate about. And so as I was thinking about that during that event, I realized, yeah, this is like the feminine, masculine polarities. You cannot be feminine or masculine simultaneously, just as you cannot breathe in and out simultaneously. And I had this idea, oh, if I would be in a partnership with someone who shares this passion and purpose for integral relationship, then, she could maybe deliver some things or learn more about what we feel passionate about while I work on the marketing side or the other way around. It was just like a really strong feeling that sharing my passion and purpose is what I really wanted. And that was deeply implemented in me and resonated with me. And 2 years later, I gave a workshop in New York, and I shared this with a group, and actually in a breakout session, I shared it with one of the participants. And the day after the workshop, she contacted me and said, I would like to meet you. And I said, sure, I'm still in New York. Why don't you come to the place where I'm staying and the hotel? And she said, I think I'm the one. I share your passion and purpose. I want to be with you, right? And I love you. And she was very convincing and very insisting. And I said, I don't know, you may be too young, you don't have children, I'm really looking, blah, blah, blah. But she convinced me to get into a relationship, and I fell in love with her. And she moved from New York to California eventually. And after a year, she said, it became apparent that she didn't share my passion and purpose. Right? It was something she wanted to do, but many other things she also wanted to do, and that didn't really work for me. And so we separated, and that was probably one of the most humiliating experiences in my whole life. I was terribly heartbroken. I was embarrassed. I was humiliated. I'm the integral relationship guy. We were the integral relationship couple. And I failed miserably. It was terrible. I mean, it took me 1.5 years or so to regain some sense of footing again. And I was like almost paralyzed. And so I realized I hadn't thought this really through with this shared purpose. And also in integral relationships, as you may know, I always said, love is unconditional. When you fall in love, all you need to figure out is how to have a healthy relationship, right? And you need to learn all these relationship skills that we covered so far. And this is still true, right? This is not wrong. It's good to have all this information about quadrants and levels and lines and states of love and the unconscious and everything we covered, right? This is very important. But if you want to share a purpose, this is not just happening automatically. And so I got to know a guy in Marin County named Jonathan Gustin, who we will talk a little bit more about next week, who has the Purpose Guide Institute. He trains people in becoming purpose guides to help other people to discover their what he called soul's purpose. And so I learned a lot from him about other teachers and what he's teaching about identifying our purpose, and read pretty much everything I could get my hands on about purpose. And as I investigated that more, I came to a few insights. So first of all, I want to say I'm very skeptical about this, what Cohen calls evolutionary purpose or eros. And I will talk a little bit more about why I don't think that's sufficient or has some flaws. And the other insight I had, and that's what we want to cover today, is I think humans actually have three different kinds of purposes that transcend and include each other. And the first purpose that we have is our biological purpose, or I call it our biological purpose or our biological imperative. That's what we're going to explore today. And then we also have some people awaken to what I call our transformational purpose. And that is what we, in a way, explored so far in the last 21 sessions, I think, is this topic of learning, healing, growing, and awakening, right? And doing that in the context of a love relationship. So that goes beyond our biological purpose. And then next week, we're going to talk about our transcendental purpose. And that goes beyond the transformational purpose. And some people, like you, Natalie, and Bo, you probably, and some of others of you maybe, have also awoken to your transformational, to your transcendental purpose. And we're going to talk about how to share your transcendental purpose in a relationship. So we all live and share our biological purpose in relationship. And then these other two purposes are somewhat optional, or they arise out of sharing our biological purpose for some people. So we all share our biological purpose. And the next insight that I had was that this also leads to different forms of love. And so that's where then this 800 plus page book emerged, where we not only talk about the sexes co-creating relationships, but also sharing our purpose and what different expressions or forms of love this leads to. So I went beyond my first book where I said, oh, love is just unconditional, it's just there, right? I also saw that there is different capacities or forms or structures or whatever you would want to call it of love. So I also looked at love from an integral perspective, and we're going to talk about that today as well. And as I thought about more into this topic of shared purpose, I went like, I think it is also important that we think a little bit about what is the meaning of life and why are we here. And of course, many other people for thousands of years have thought about this topic. And so I want to start very briefly with what I call meaning-making structures and the three common ways of how most people try to explain why are we here. And one theory is creationism, right? That God or some godlike figure created the earth and humans and everything that's on earth, the animals and the plants and whatnot, and maybe the whole universe, right? And this is, of course, what all major religion has, so like a creation myth, they call that, how God created the world at a certain point, or a godlike figure. And then definitely with Charles Darwin, right, who had these insights about evolutionary theory, which became known as evolutionary theory. By the way, he rarely or never used the word evolution. He a little bit like me, thought that there is no intelligence or no telos or no eros in evolution. And since then we have this, widely accepted idea of evolutionary theory. And there are also physicists like Lawrence Krauss, for example, who wrote a book, how there can be something out of nothing, right? And so there are certain explanations why, from a physical and from a biological perspective why we perceive the universe as it is. And so we'll talk about a little bit about that more in a moment. And then there is something new that kind of emerged in recent decades, which is now known as intelligent design. So this is what Ken Wilber and others around him subscribe to. They say, yes, there is evolutionary theory and the Big Bang and all this stuff. That's all good and fine, but it doesn't really explain how the brain, human consciousness, our vision that we have and things like that, that could not just emerge through random, more or less sexual selection and survival of the fittest, right? There needs to be some kind of underlying intelligence that has sort of like a hand in the evolutionary process. So it's sort of like a bit of an integration of creationism and evolutionary theory. But critics of intelligent design, like Richard Dawkins, for example, and also Lawrence Krauss and many others, they say, well, this theory about intelligent design, they replace the word God with spirit, and then they're very close to kind of like making that into some form of religion. And I saw that a lot at the Center for Spiritual Living, where they then often, use the word God still, that there is some kind of God. So it's a little tricky, but of course, Ken Wilber has argued very strongly, and other people, that there must be some kind of intelligence underlying evolution, even though if we don't believe in a mythic God. And I just thought it's important for an integral relationship that couples have at least some kind of agreement on a belief on why are we here, in order to then share their biological and transformational and transcendental purpose. But as I thought more into this whole topic, none of these three really resonated with me. And so I came up, or I felt into something which I now call the co-creative impulse, or the co-creative and procreative impulse. So this idea of the co-creative impulse says, yes, there is some driving force in the universe, right? And this driving force leads to subatomic particles to love each other and to create atoms. And then atoms love each other, certain atoms love each other, and they co-create molecules, right? And molecules love each other to create, we jump ahead, maybe cells, and then cells love each other and create cell tissue and so on and so forth. So we can say, and there are, of course, other people who say that the universe is inherently co-creative, right? Without particles coming together and forming new wholes that are more complex and have different qualities than the parts out of which they are made, is why we experience ourselves and existence as it is, right? And that in my, how should I say, intuition, right? I have no proof for that. Nobody probably does. But in my human experience, I experience this desire to co-create. And from a scientific perspective, we can also say that things are emergent and co-creative. And so I want to suggest this fourth option of the co-creative impulse. And later I learned that Arthur Schopenhauer, for example, had a similar idea in his philosophy. He called it the will to live, and Nietzsche called it the will to power, right? Even though Nietzsche said God is dead, right? Kind of criticizing creationism, he still felt that there is some driving force in the universe, or some people call it élan vital, or the just feeling fully alive, or so that there is something that drives aliveness, right? And so that's a fourth alternative I want to suggest. And very briefly is the Gallup did a poll in 2014. That's the latest I could find in the United States. 42% of people believe in creationism, in the creation myth, and 31% into intelligent design, and only 19% in evolutionary theory. And in Germany, it's 16% who believe in creationism, and 69% in evolutionary theory, and only 4% in intelligent design. So there are huge cultural differences. So obviously cultures have a sort of like different centers of gravities around their belief in why are we here, and then individuals have these different beliefs. And I think that has an impact on then what we're going to explore a little later around how we make sense of why we are here, and also on our purpose. So the co-creative impulse, right, is sort of like just, we have no explanation. I could never find an explanation. Why do certain atoms, for example, right, like H2O, 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen atom, why is there so like a resonance? Roy Bhaskar calls it a resonance, right? There seems to be like people have resonances, that also certain particles or certain entities, right, have a resonance with each other, and they combine with each other to create a new whole, right, that has very different properties than the parts that are made out of. So water, for example, has a very different property than oxygen and hydrogen seen individually, right? And so that's how basically evolution works, is that parts come together and create new parts. And what the creationists say, to use that example, says, well, God is doing that, right? And so if we come to humans, they say, well, God brought us together, right? It's God's will, and we should get married. Or they say the evolution is God has a hand in that. The evolutionary theory people say, no, there is no intelligence in whatsoever. Eventually we will be able to explain this through physics and biochemistry, etc., etc. There is zero intelligence, right? And so life has also no meaning, right? That we are here is just an accident of this, how can there be something out of nothing kind of idea, right? So, and then the intelligent design people say, no, there is some subtle form of intelligence that we can align ourselves with, right? That's like maybe the part I was missing there, right? Is that what Andrew Cohen and other people say, you know, we can align ourselves with this intelligence, and there's thousands of teachers out there who kind of try to teach you how you can realize your infinite potentials by aligning yourself with this spirit, with this intelligence that is somewhere out there, right? And they have then all kinds of theories, morphic resonance, yada, 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 right? And what I struggle with these three concepts is, if there is really a God or an intelligence out there, right, that we can align ourselves with, it takes a lot of responsibility away from us, because evolution will just continue to happen. And if there is a war in the Ukraine and that's God's will, then, well, okay, there is a war in the Ukraine, right? Or somebody just wrote me, oh, I'm so glad I'm enlightened because everybody's freaking out about COVID and the war in the Ukraine. But I know this is just, everything is just perfect as it is, right? So I have no responsibility. I don't have, you know, I'm not responsible. There's nothing I need to do. And I think where I'm going with this, so there must be some form of driving force in the universe that drives this emergence, right? It's like, why is this co-creation happening in the first place? Right? Why do we have a sex drive? Why do we want to be together with other people? Right? But the intelligence, in my opinion, is not out there. The intelligence is in us. Right? We need to take responsibility for our actions, and the only thing that's driving us is that inherently we want to co-create with other people. I'm not saying I'm right about that. It ultimately doesn't matter, but it matters a little bit because, as we will explore for the rest of the training, I feel very passionate about the importance of males and females or same-sex couples to co-create, right? And if we say, well, it's not important that we co-create with other humans, then we're not really aligning ourselves with this co-creative impulse, right? If we say, well, God is creating this, or this eros, evolution, right, is creating a better future, and I have nothing to do with that. I can just be sort of like a passive bystander and say everything is perfect as it is, and I don't want to have any desire, any attachment, any hatred, right? I'm just going to be this passive, awakened, spiritual, whatever being. Or on the, if you think life is meaningless and you're a nihilist, right? That is too pessimistic for me. I think life actually has a meaning, but the meaning comes through me and not to something outside. And that's why I am a proponent of this co-creative impulse, which goes beyond the life force or an elan vital, because in their concepts there is no co-creative aspect. When I thought about this biological purpose, of course other people have done that, and what they call this our biological imperative, biologists and other people. And this is, as I said, we share with all other living things, is that we want to somehow, need nutrition. We humans need to eat, animals need to eat. We want to survive. We need to reproduce, or have in our human body, we experience our sexuality, our sex drive, and seek quality of life. So here is a little cartoon, right, about that. And then we humans, our neocortex develops. And then, a lot of people say, well, what is life all about? Well, it's really not that difficult, because most parts of our brain we share with other mammals. And, everything that's going on in the reptilian and in the limbic brain system is really related towards nutrition and survival and reproduction and quality of life seeking, or in a little bit more scientific terms, right? We need food, shelter, safety, and we humans, we also need to learn how to survive. It's not all for us instinctual anymore. Then, as mentioned, we have our drive for reproduction, for procreation, and I think it's really interesting to think about that we humans only figured out 50 years ago, in hundred thousands of years of human evolution, how to safely have sex without getting pregnant, right, with the invention of the pill. And we now see, as we will talk about in Module 26, that it has unprecedented consequences for human societies. For example, that we now in most countries have birth rates that are way below replacement, right? So like between 1 and 2 children on average per woman. And so I think when future humans, if they exist, will look back at our times, they will say that was probably had the most impact on human evolution, was not only the invention of contraception, but also the social acceptance of contraception. So we still have the sex drive, which is the co-creative impulse or the procreative impulse to sustain our race, but we're increasingly, with the liberation of women and education of women, which is all great and wonderful, basically becoming extinct or moving towards extinction, because we're no longer reproducing at levels that would sustain the human race. So I find it quite an interesting aspect. Then we have a drive towards group forming. And traditionally, this group forming was to go from individuals to couples to family to community, and then society and humanity. And as we will explore in Module 26, nowadays, we often see that people think in terms of individual and society. For friend Roger Walsh just started a new podcast, and it's called Individual Society Spirituality. And I wrote to him and said, well, Roger, what about couples, family, and community? Right? He as many others, makes this jump from, well, I'm an individual and I'm part of society, and we forget about everything in the middle, right? That's either a private decision, or I think it's almost like something unconscious in people, right? That having coupled relationships and family and having children and creating community, that sort of like becomes less and less important for a lot of people. And so that's, of course, what this whole training is about, to bring back this middle part in social holons, that actually couples, family, and community do matter for a peaceful and sustainable future for humanity. Then humans are territorial, right? We all experience that we have boundaries, and my home is my castle, and that's my private sphere. This is my territory, right? I decide who can come in and come out. But then also groups, families become territorial, and communities, and as we now see in the Ukraine, countries, right, become territorial. And we haven't had a war in Europe for, is it 75 years now? And so a lot of people are shocked about this violation of, this is our territory and you cannot come in and take over our territory. So this is also that a lot of animals, and let's say dogs, etc., right, they're very territorial. And then we have this drive for competition and cooperation, right? For a while, I think Nietzsche was all about, not all about, but was a lot about competition. But we now also know that humans have genes for altruism, for cooperation, because, let's go back a few 10,000 years, somebody was killing a big animal, right? And the meat would go bad pretty quickly because they didn't have refrigerators, unless they were very far in the north and it was very cold. But so it made sense to share these resources with others, so that when others would have gained access to resources, they would then also share with us, right? So we have this altruistic genes and drives, but also we compete, of course, for resources, and we compete for mates. So that's one of the big competitive drives, is that we, males compete for women with the best reproductive capabilities, and females compete for males with productive capabilities. And then very often overlooked is our innate drive towards quality of life seeking. Like all other living creatures, we want to be comfortable. And that, of course, has gone totally out of whack, right, with modern and postmodern societies, where, being comfortable for some people means to own a $600 million yacht, right, and own several mansions and a private plane and whatever, right, and eat caviar and drink champagne all the time. And so there's like no upper limit in human quality of life seeking, which is obviously not really sustainable, at least where we are right now in 2022. If we linearly keep going like this, we're going to ruin the planet. So we'll see what happens. And in our next module, we're going to cover and look at the possible solutions. So this is very important to understand this for where we're going to go with this, because living our biological purpose, right, and everyone who's alive is living their biological purpose. As we can repress certain things and split off certain things, but if we really get in touch with the co-creative impulse and the life force, or the elan vital, or whatever we want to call it, or if you want to live God's will, right, who also often says, form couples and reproduce, these are basically the instinctually, genetically predispositioned biological imperatives that when we get our ego out of the way, our separate sense of self, we can align ourselves with this co-creative impulse, with this life force, and then co-create healthy relationships. This is what the norm process that I'm talking a lot about recently, right? This is all they're talking about, is aligning yourself with the life force, or feeling this life force and co-creating healthy relationships. That's one reason why I like that approach so much for people who are not in touch with the life force and are not able to form healthy relationships. And so when we then look at the biological purpose only, right, this is best lived and best fulfilled when competitive males, right, who compete for the most attractive women and compete for resources and also at times are altruistic, if they produce and protect and create. Right? That's the main, so like in a biological sense, the main male purpose. And when choosy or choosing females, with that I mean, usually there is multiple men who compete for one woman, right? And in the end, the woman says, okay, I'll pick you. Right? And that's still in our society, I've hardly ever seen anything else. There are certain exceptions that women approach men and says, I want to pick you, but usually it's the other way around, right? That multiple men compete for multiple women, and in the end, the woman chooses who she wants to have sex with and potentially be together with. And so this is best lived when females reproduce, right, and care for the males who are producing and protecting and creating, and also give feedback, right, guide men. And so we see that, for example, in Alison Armstrong's teaching. She has multiple books like Keys to the Kingdom, and then she has a later book called Making Sense of Man, A Woman's Guide to a Lifetime of Love, Care, and Attention from All Men. Right, here is the little book. I learned quite a bit from this book, also from the Calling in the One training with Catherine Woodward Thomas, right? Just studied a lot. What do women actually really want, and how can they get love from men? And so she has this little graphic here, here is, I'll just explain it real quick. On the left side, she lists what creates sexual attraction. So what gets men interested in females so they can pick one is shiny hair, shapely body, sensuality, and sexual energy. Right? So that gets us attracted, and the male response is we want to have sex with you, with the woman, nothing else. Right? And then when a woman is also charmed and enchanted, right, and she has self-confidence, authenticity, passion, and here the word receptivity is missing, so we need to put this in again, receptivity, then the man wants to spend time with her, take care of her, protect her, contribute to her, make her happy, and fall in love. Right? So this is the attraction part here on the left side, and then on the right side, we have then basically what is happening once there is a mutual attraction and the sexual attraction is working, then this is the outcome. And there are many other people who researched this basic dynamic. And what's interesting is that, when we look at the meeting of the primary fantasy that we covered, I think 2 modules ago, and look again at this producing, protecting, and creating, and reproducing, caring, and directing. Right? When I had these 3 pairs, I realized, oh my God, and that's something I think nobody else has proposed yet or offered yet, is that this aligns with the first 6 of the 7 chakras. Right? So very simply put, the first chakra has to do with the root survival, right, where the male is, from a biological perspective, right, always pointed out, we're not talking now about the other purposes, transformational and transcendental, right? Only from the biological level, the males are usually providing for survival, right, food and shelter, and the females are reproducing, right? There's sexuality and creation. Children are the result typically. then the males have the solar plexus power, the female the care, the males the creativity, and then the females the wisdom. With wisdom there, I mean that females are very wise to know what they need for their survival and well-being and their offspring, right? And they usually reward males if they do things that are in support of their survival and their well-being and their quality of life and the survival of their offspring, right? And they celebrate men, as Alison Armstrong has this program, Celebrating Men, Satisfying Women, right? And if the men do stupid things that don't support females in their well-being and their offspring, then usually, they give men challenging or negative feedback. And I think that's also what ultimately drove human evolution and human consciousness, right? And so here we have, when we then align these three pairs of desire, we get an exchange along the 7 chakras. So here is the description of the 3 exchanges, but I just show it here. So on the left side, we obviously see the 7 chakras here, is the desire, the transactional desire, right? That males usually try to be wealthy, right? Have amass resources, the car, the money, the house, the food, etc., etc. And then in exchange, right, they desire the sexy body of the woman who has good reproductive capability. So that's the desire, right? My productive capability for your reproductive capability, or vice versa. My reproductive capability for your productive capability. And then the next chakra pair, desire, is my power, my social status, my ability to protect, to be aggressive towards others, and on a good day benevolent towards his partner. And in exchange, he desires, or she desires, this power, and he desires her care and her love. As the Beatles sang, "It's been a hard day's night and I've been working like a dog, but when I come home to you, I like the things that you do, feeling me, making me feel all right, feeling you holding me tight," right? There's a lot of love songs that talk about this, like, the man being out there fighting, working to amass resources, and then when he comes home, then he wants to be taken care of by the female who has a big heart. And then females, of course, love men who make them laugh and entertain them and are creative, make things that benefit her, and that we males want to be appreciated and want to be celebrated, right? And if you remember the fear-shame downward spiral, you can also see a little bit that when males fail in providing what makes them attractive to females, they feel shame. And when females don't get what they desire in a relationship to feel safe, right, and provided for and protected and entertained in the widest sense, then they feel fear, right? So we see also the fear-shame downward spiral here. And so this is the desire. And then when there is a mutual match where, what somebody has to offer is matched by what the other partner has to offer, then we get these transactional love relationships. So I call them need-based, asymmetrical transactional love relationship. And the hormones get released, and we authentically then feel that we love this person because she is very sexy and he's very wealthy or has good resources. He's very powerful, she's very caring, he's very creative, she's very happy and supportive in celebrating him, giving him feedback, and sometimes also telling him where maybe he can improve or do things differently. And this has brought us here, right? So this dynamic has happened over 10,000, 100,000 of years, and this is what most people then experience as love when this dynamic here is happening. And so we also see that related in the love triangle, or the triangular theory of love, where we see the passion part on the right side when the first second chakra exchange is happening, and some relationships, as we saw, are just on the level of sexual passion. We get emotional dependence by a connection between the third and the fourth chakra, and we can even feel that, right? When we fall in love, our heart aches and we have butterflies in the belly, so there's a strong reaction in our chakras, right? And we also feel the passion, sexual passion in our second chakra, and the groundedness and the safety, right, that we want to experience to be sexual, specifically women to be sexual with men, is the passion part. And then the intimacy part usually requires some kind of verbal expression and some feedback. So that's happening on the exchange of the fifth and sixth chakra. So it's really nice to see how these things then, the fear-shame dynamic, the triangular theory of love, the biological purpose, and the chakras, how that all fits together. I mean, naturally, this needs to be so, right? It can't be otherwise. And so for me, the 7 chakras are the energy centers in the body through which the co-creative impulse manifests. That's my definition of the 7 chakras. There is other valid definition, of course, as well. And I have a video with Anodea Judith, where she had a book out called Charge, which is also integrally informed, and we talked about this energy exchange, this charge exchange in romantic love relationships. So I'll put a link to the module to this video. And I know this is a lot of theory right now, so you may want to revisit this in the facilitator sheet. So the next thought then that I had is that obviously there is evolution of consciousness and cultural evolution, and what people desire in this asymmetrical exchange, of course, has evolved over time. So if we put the 7 chakras here on the left side, and we put at the bottom the root female desire, right, for protection and for providing and safety, and male desire for reproductive capabilities, that, you know, she is sexy in modern terms, and then the female desire for protection and social status, and the male desire for care, and the female desire for creativity, and the male desire for celebration and appreciation and feedback, right? And we put the 7 stages from archaic to magic, egocentric, mythic, rational, pluralistic, and integral at the top, then we get this chakra consciousness matrix in the context of optimally living our biological purpose, or sharing our biological purpose. It's the better word, sharing, right? Driven through the co-creative impulse. And so I'm not going to read all the intersections here, but if you just look at the first one, right, in an archaic, so like very, very early human world, before the invention or the discovery of fire, there was probably raw meat and other foods that they could gather, and they were living so like side by side in hordes. And then with the emergence of more consciousness and fire, they could cook food and meat, and they would be more effective hunters and live in tribes that, you know, would have more cohesion. Then at the egocentric level, you know, people are probably very interested in fast food, sugar, fat, salt, and substances, maybe that sound like being very hedonistic. I want to be happy now and live in gang-like structures. And then at the mythic level, we have agriculture. So we have more carbs and protein and fruits and vegetables that we can farm, and we live in towns or little villages, and it's very family oriented. And then at the rational level, you know, I've read enough profiles where women say, I'm very interested in fine dining and fine wine and gourmet stuff and travel and luxury living in a suburban setting maybe, or in New York in one of the big apartments in high rises overlooking the city. And then at a pluralistic level, maybe there is an interest in healthy organic foods, no GMO, nature living, and maybe again some form of communal living. And then at the integral level, sustainable foods and living in an urban environment again. So these are just pointers, right? You need to decide for yourself. But obviously, in kind, the desire stays the same, right? For being with a partner who has good productive capabilities and who can take care of a woman. But how this is expressed is, of course, changing as humanity was evolving, or hopefully still continues to evolve. There's also some devolution, as we will see. And so the male desire maybe goes from fertility to youthfulness, to uninhibitedness, to faithfulness, to physical fitness, elegance, the trophy wife, to tantric lover, to transcendental kundalini awakening kind of sexuality. And so we can now could look at each of these chakra consciousness intersections. And I recently had a couple, they were struggling in their relationship, and when they saw this, they independently kind of marked the squares, the interactions here, what they were desiring in their partner, and then when they compared their matrices here, they realized that they were not in sync, right? He happened to be mostly in sort of like a mythic rational level of desire, and she was at a pluralistic integral level of desire. And they ended actually up to split, then to end their relationships, which was kind of sad, but at least they saw relatively early on in their relationship that they were incompatible in that way. And what we will look at throughout the rest of the training is that we can now put or divide each of these squares, so just going to put a line in here, into the 4 quadrants, right? Because any co-creation here in these squares is happening in the 4 quadrants, in the I, the we, the it, and the its dimension. Right? So that adds one more layer of complexity to this, I'm sorry to say. But if we're aware or not, doesn't matter. This drive through the 7 chakras is always there, through the co-creative impulse. And for whatever reason, these centers have developed that we literally can feel in our body, right? When we fall in love or are attracted to someone, there is no energy in our knee or elbow, right, or other body parts. But there is always something felt along at least the first 6 of the 7 chakras. And it happens automatically. You're not doing this with your neocortex. And then as soon as you start to co-create with the other person, as we have looked at in previous modules, like around sexuality, for example, it always happens in each of the 4 dimensions, regardless if we're conscious of it or not. Let's see if I can delete this. And so another way of drawing this, hopefully not driving you completely crazy, is we can also start with the 4 quadrants, and we can then draw in the levels of consciousness development, and then at each level of consciousness development we have the 7 chakras. So this is just another way of looking at this when we would put the 4 quadrants into these squares. And so what is then happening, coming back to this image, and we're almost done, is when we co-create a love relationship based on this asymmetrical, need-based, transactional experience of love, as I said before, relationships can just happen on the first and second chakra exchange level, and the third, fourth chakra exchange in fifth and sixth. And as long as each partner meets the expectation of the other partner, we have a functional, healthy relationship. But when one partner is no longer holding up his or her end of the bargain, or the social exchange theory that we will look at in a moment, then of course the other person will not be happy. And from a Hegelian dialectical perspective, right, the person who is still getting what they bargained for will be the master in the relationship, and the other one will be the slave, or the person who's still getting still is in a power role, if you will, and the person who's no longer getting what they bargained for loses power. And this ends in a way this endless conversation, who has more power in relationships, right? Traditionally, we say, oh, the men have all the power and the women are powerless. But trust me, a man who gets stumped by a woman who he still is in love with and wants to be with, he doesn't feel very powerful. Or a man who's still providing but no longer getting the sex that he desires, he doesn't feel very powerful. And of course, a woman who still offers sex to the man and doesn't get provided, she also doesn't feel powerful. So it really depends on who is no longer providing what the other person has bargained for, and then the other person would feel then powerless, and the other person would be more powerful because he or she still gets what they desired. So that creates like these power dynamics and master-slave relationships, which I briefly write about here. And then there is something that plays into that, which is called social exchange theory. So apparently, inherently, we have like this constant looking at where do we invest our resources in social exchanges, in social interactions. So that can be at the workplace or in love relationships, or even you investing your money in a way into a business or something like that, where we always kind of intuitively say, well, do I get a return on my investment? Right? And if I'm no longer getting a good return on my investment, let's say in a love relationship, right, that I'm putting in much more than what I'm getting out, then people may go to this comparison level for alternatives, and they say, would I get more bang for the buck, so to speak, if I would invest my resources into another person, into another relationship, or would even staying single being a better investment for my resources, which of course then goes against the co-creative impulse. And we don't have the time to go into all the details right now, but we of course know that there is a huge increase in depression, in drug abuse, the opioids crisis, and loneliness, and there's just a lot of psychological and then eventually economic and social issues that are arising because there are more and more single people, right? And we know from research over time they're unhappier than people who are in healthy relationships, and then of course they often become more aggressive. And so this is a huge topic that we're going to cover in the next few modules, and then specifically in module 26, what are the consequences that we're facing right now as in the state of humanity. So the social exchange theory. So that's the part of the biological, sharing our biological purpose. So what is our biological purpose and how do we share it? And of course, nature has created these love hormones, right? So that the love hormones kick in when we feel we find or we're attracted to someone who we think, is a good match in this transactional first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth chakra exchange. And pretty much any dating profile that you read, right, from males and females, or if you look at talk to men what they desire in a female, you talk to a female what they desire in a male, you see basically this dynamic playing out. And that brought us here. Without that, we wouldn't be here. And somehow it's increasingly breaking down, right? And fewer people are co-creating and living their biological purpose in healthy relationships. So that's that. Why are some people really so negative towards having a healthy love relationship and having children, and point out that we will cover transcendence and transformational relationships in the next module. And so it's also interesting that some people say, well, I don't want to be objectified as a success object or a sex object, and so on and so forth, right? Or some people say, well, so that's one end of the spectrum, and some other people say, well, why would I want to have sex with a guy if he cannot provide me, right? Are you suggesting I should, have sex with men who are not good protectors and providers? Or men say, well, are you suggesting I should have provide for a very unattractive woman that I'm not sexually attracted to, right? So it's really, the different responses are really interesting. But we can't help it, right? It's our nature that these dynamics play out because they're part of our genetic makeup and of our biological purpose. And the good news is about this is when we talk about our transformational purpose, so that arises for some people out of the biological purpose. I'm going to go down here. What we implicitly, and now I make it explicit, have talked about so far in the training is actually for people like you who are here and those who are watching this, is living or awakening to our, what I call our transformational purpose. And our transformational purpose is to learn, like learning about the integral relationship model, to heal our wounds, right, with whatever means we need, to grow in consciousness, right, to develop in consciousness, and also to develop in other crucial developmental lines, and to awaken, to spiritually awaken. And so the whole training that we did so far, represented in the 4 dimensions of our being and co-creation, and this personality matrix to develop healthy feminine masculine polarities and learn about our types and things, they're all basically there for us to realize our full human potential, so that we can then also really living our biological purpose and get less and less away from the unhealthy aspects of this need-based transactional asymmetrical relationships, to then what we will cover next in the next module, also awaken to our transcendental purpose, and then being able to what will be our final image in the training, to co-create love relationships with a shared biological, transformational, and transcendental purpose, with intimacy, passion, and commitment, co-created along the 7 chakras by balancing and harmonizing feminine, masculine polarities in all 4 dimensions of our being. So that's the definition, basically, of an integral love relationship, or my definition of an integral love relationship. So at the top of the triangle, we now also have this driving force, if you will, of the shared purpose, driven by the co-creative impulse. And that's what I also see and work for, that this is creates then a sustainable, peaceful future for humanity. Right now it doesn't really look like we're moving in this direction, but I think there is real hope that more and more people in the next century, decades and centuries will awaken to these kind of relationships. So if your head is about to explode right now, for whatever reason, We're going to spend the whole rest of the training going deeper into this model. So next week we're going to look at, as I said, the transcendental relationships. Then we have a new view on what is a soulmate and how can we define, identify, and select with the soulmate. And then the next module we're going to talk about how do we co-create these kind of relationships with our soulmate. And then in the last module, we're going to explore why does that matter for the future of humanity. So today we just created a broad framework for this new types of relationships that are actually emerging on the planet. Right? We can already study couples who are living that. And this gives you the map how to consciously co-create it. So how did or does your partner's meaning-making structure, we already talked about that, inform your relationships and your values, right? And maybe what you're looking for in a partner. What is or was the dialectical attraction exchange dynamic in your relationships between the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, sixth chakra, right? What relevance has that played? At what level of consciousness is or was each of these dialectical exchanges created? Right? And now we obviously now see when the attraction, let's say what was at an orange level for both of you, and one person moves into the pluralistic green or the integral level, right? Then these desires are changing. And that when one partner is left behind, then that leads to the master-slave relationships, or this asymmetrical exchange is no longer working. How is or was each of the dialectical exchanges expressed in the 4 quadrants? If you want to go into that more deeper level to look at each of the quadrants. Did the dialectic of love break down at some point for you in your current or past relationship? Right? Did you no longer get what you were bargaining for, but you gave it still to your partner, or were you both withholding? Of course, then that's obviously when you're totally drifting apart. Did you become the master or the slave in one or more chakra pairs in a current or past relationship, right? Where you were still providing what your partner was desiring and made him or her loved, but you didn't get back what made you feel loved, and it became very one-sided. Right? That often happens. What transactional forms of desire do you have now in a current or imagined future relationship, and what kind of capacities to love would you like to develop in your current or future relationship, right? And this is where we then move into the transformational purpose, right? When you say, well, I really need to learn more about relationships, I need to heal my trauma, my wounding, I need to become more conscious, right? And I need to awaken more, then that often these breakups, these challenges lead us into our transformational purpose. This is what happened for me, right? I was living the biological purpose, and at one point that no longer worked for me, and so I was looking, for better solutions. And as I said, I discovered Stephen Covey, Eckhart Tolle, Ken Wilber, and was lucky enough to have a personal relationship and get trained by Eckhart Tolle and can become friends with Ken Wilber and be friends with Andrew Cohen. So that helped me a lot in the work that I'm doing today, and hopefully my ability to love. And then have you and your partner, current or past, entered into transformational purpose and transformational love. So do you see your relationship not only from a biological perspective, but also as the best vehicle to learn, to grow, to heal, and awaken? I think as we now established sufficiently, is that most of these aspects of learning, healing, growing, and awakening is best enacted or lived in a coupled relationship, because we can only heal our relationship wounds in the context of a relationship. And we need that kind of feedback, right? Because we can usually not really see our true self, right? Our partner, a soulmate, as we will explore, can really often see our full potential better than we can ourselves. There's a simple, I forgot now which philosopher that was, it's like, it's very hard for us to discover that we have bad breath, for example. We need somebody else to tell us, right? And we need other people to call us on our shit, or, challenge us to become the best versions of ourselves.